Chinese President Xi Jinping delivered his New Year's message and outlined Beijing's goals for 2020. We will take a look at that and what it means for China and the world. Hello, I'm Einar, and this is The Heat.
2020年就要到了，我在首都北京向大家送上新年的美好祝福。
In his annual speech on New Year's Eve, Chinese President Xi Jinping praised the country's accomplishments, a growing economy, poverty alleviation, and technological advancements. He also defended the system for running regions like Macau and Hong Kong and spoke about what's next in 2020.
2019年，我们用汗水浇灌收获，以实干笃定前行，高质量发展平稳推进。我国国内生产总值预计将接近100万亿元人民币，人均将迈上1万美元的台阶。
President Xi reviewed major development strategies the country has been promoting during the past 12 months, including the Guangdong-Hong Kong-Macau Greater Bay Area, the country's robust campaign of poverty elimination and scientific research programs such as Lunar Probe Chang'e 4 and Long March 5 Y3 rocket. President Xi also talked about the major events that China witnessed and the significant achievements it made over the past 12 months, such as the Import Expo, the Grand Military Parade, and the celebration of the 70th anniversary of the founding of the People's Republic of China. The Chinese president also shared his outlook for the new year.
2020年是具有里程碑意义的一年。 我们将全面建成小康社会，实现第一个100年奋斗目标。2020年也是脱贫攻坚、决战决胜之年。
President Xi said the successful practice of the one country, two systems policy in Macau shows that the policy is fully applicable. He also said that his heart is with the people of Hong Kong. Finally, he encouraged the Chinese people to work hard and fight for their future.
祝大家新年快乐！
To discuss the speech, let's introduce our panel here in our studio. John Gong is a professor of economics at the University of International Business and Economics in Beijing. Also with us, Jonathan Broder is a senior writer for Newsweek magazine. From Toronto, Sean Ding is the co-founder and CEO of G-Risk. And Einar Tangen, joining us from Beijing, is a political and economic affairs commentator. Welcome to all of you. John Gong, let me start with you. Clearly, the big focus in the speech was on the economy and the quest to lift everyone out of poverty and create a moderately prosperous China. What did you make of the address?
Well, I think it's the two numbers he mentioned are very significant. The $100 trillion yuan GDP in aggregate, and also the per capita GDP to reach $10,000, and this put China into the upper end of the upper middle income class according to the World Bank's categorization, and it's only $2,000 away from the next category, which is the high income category. Right now, in 2018, there are, I think, 70-some countries that are out of a total of 218 or 217 economies in the world that are classified as high-income countries, and China's only $2,000 away from there. And I think, to reach that $2,000 goal, probably only less than 5 years, I would say. So China will be, in my prediction, is that China will be breaking into the high-income country category in about maybe 4 to 5 years. I think he mentioned these two numbers. That's it's a very resounding claim. I think that China is on its way into very the most wealthy class of countries in the world. And that's a great achievement, I think.
And the other thing, of course, John, is that President Xi has made it something of a personal goal to eliminate poverty completely in the country.
Right. I mean, that's another thing that, President Xi is very much, close to the ordinary people. He said ordinary people making extraordinary lives, right? Yeah. And the welfare of the poorest people in China is very much in his heart. He said that we have eliminated poverty among 10 million people in the last 2 years or so. And that's a great achievement. And there are still some people out there who are still living sort of in
right.
quite poverty lifestyle. And I think the country is determined to eliminate all sorts of poverty. Although we have to be keep in mind that the definition of poverty in China is actually quite low compared to the United States, for example, because the average income that is classified as poverty is actually way, way less than the poverty level here in the United States.
Okay. Well, let me go to Sean Ding in Toronto. Sean Ding, this speech came as news emerged that China and the United States will be signing a trade deal, well, at least phase one of a trade deal just 2 weeks from now. In fact, the US President Donald Trump tweeted about that. He said, and I'm quoting here, "I will be signing our very large and comprehensive phase one trade deal with China on January 15th. The ceremony will take place at the White House. High-level representatives of China will be present. At a later date, I will be going to Beijing, where talks will begin on phase two." So, as far as the trade deal is concerned, Sean, what can we expect in 2020?
Well, I think, Arnon, if you look at President Xi's speech, he's definitely exerting a lot of optimism and confidence. Without a doubt, China and the U.S. had a rather turbulent year, to say the least, in 2019 and even 2018, but the speech didn't mention in specific any of those challenges. Instead, he was saying that in the speech that China would be able to weather any kind of storms or barriers. So I think that the Chinese leadership through this speech is telling the world and perhaps the U.S. and President Trump as well that the Chinese economy and society will be able to withstand the kind of challenges from the U.S. as well as having the resilience in the society for the year 2020.
Jonathan, Sean Ding mentioned there the fact that relations between the United States and China have been turbulent over the past year. The president of China did not mention that. How significant was that?
Well, I think that in a New Year's speech like this, it really wasn't necessary to get into the intricate details of the disagreements between the United States and China. I think phase one of this trade agreement is significant. Basically, the outlines are that China agrees to buy more American products, and the Americans have agreed to lift tariffs on Chinese goods. What isn't in the agreement is also very important. One of the big complaints that the United States has had over China's economic policy is the state subsidies that it gives to state companies. And the Americans allege that China uses all kinds of different ways to make Americans, companies that are doing business in China, hand over their technology to the Chinese in order to do business in China. China disputes this, but this is something that has to be worked out. So I think one of the things that one can glean from President Xi's speech is that the system that China follows, its economic rules and its policies, President Xi feels that these rules work for China and that it has helped lift a lot of people out of poverty.
Right.
And they don't see any reason to adhere to what America calls international norms, because China had no role in drawing up those norms. And like I said, the current system works for them. So these are issues that are going to have to be worked out.
Just one point, Jonathan, before I move on. This phase one part of the deal, which will be signed in 2 weeks' time, it comes at the beginning of election year in the United States. Do you think it's going to have an impact on the election?
Well, I think that, yes. I mean, one of the reasons why I think Trump agreed to sign I mean, this is an offer that China had on the table for a long time, we have to remember. The fact that Trump finally agreed to embrace it is a sign that he knew that the tariffs, which he claimed China was paying, were in fact Americans were paying it,
Right.
farmers were paying it, farmers in states that he needs to win in order to get reelected. So I think that this was very clearly a political gesture as well as an economic one.
All right, let's go to Einar Tangen in Beijing. Einar, great to see you again. President Xi also spoke about the process of reform and opening up in China. What can we expect in the coming year?
Well, it's a kind of slow and steady goes the ship. I mean, the tone of this particular speech emotionally was to calm people down, to remind them of what had happened in the past, and that China continues to go ahead. The war on poverty, making sure that these economic zones work, that China expands in the Belt and Road Initiative, that it's managing its affairs. It's a stark contrast, perhaps, to Donald Trump, who's angrily tweeting from the golf course about how bad he feels about his impeachment trial. So I think it's very important for people to look at these two leaders and see the differences on where they're taking their country, not only in terms of strategy. I don't know exactly what Trump's is, but in terms of tone. How they are trying to reassure the people as they enter a momentous year, 2020. I mean, this is it's going to be an interesting year, as they say. That's an old Chinese curse. May you live in interesting times. And I think this reason that there was not a lot of reference to the U.S. is because it's still an unknown. There's still a trust deficit there. You'll note that it is not Xi Jinping who's going to Washington to sign this. Liu He will be there. If assuming it goes through, 2 weeks in the Trump world is a long, long period. So we're just going to have to cross our fingers and hope that this goes forward.
Anna, as you point out, President Xi Jinping will not be coming to Washington for this deal. Yet President Trump, in his tweet, said that he will be going to Beijing himself, personally, to negotiate phase 2.
Yeah, and we saw that with North Korea. I don't know that necessarily his personal diplomacy has had the kind of impact that he's desired. We all saw the pictures of the huddled G7 members making fun, apparently making fun of him at the last big event, and him stomping out and canceling his farewell speech or his statement. I think he's overestimating exactly how far his charm offensive is going to work. These are structural issues that we're talking about, and it's not something where you just say, hey, listen, give me some face. Can you change your system so that I can get reelected? Right. I think a lot of this will be to defer attention away from the impeachment trial. He wants to appear strong. One of his best cards is to say that no matter what you think of me, if I'm delivering in terms of the economy, you should vote for me again. And I think that will be the main theme of his interaction with China, that he's tough on China, that he's winning, and that he's going to win more.
John, the President Xi also talked about China's foreign policy. Let's watch part of that speech, that part of the speech.
我同很多国家元首和政府首脑会晤，分享了中国主张，增进了友谊，深化了共识。世界上又有一些国家同我国建交，我国建交国达到180个，我们的朋友遍天下。
So, John, China, of course, has been a firm believer in the concept of multilateralism, is a strong supporter of globalization. How do you see those policies unfold in the months ahead?
I think China is going to continue this course. I think what President Xi is talking about is that we're winning over 2 or 3 countries this year that have severed diplomatic relations with Taiwan and established relations with China. I think the number of countries that are in the camp of Taiwan only is about 50, I think it's only 15 now. It's a dwindling number of countries that are still maintaining diplomatic relations with Taiwan. I think this is a great achievement. It contributes to, I think, peace and stability in Asia. And also, I think, it is somehow also quells the independence drive in Taiwan. I think people in Taiwan have to realize that this is a route that has no hope. It's a dead end. You know, we need to sit down and talk about peaceful development together. So I think this is a great achievement. And in terms of the defense of multilateralism, I think President Xi's entire platform is very clear that it's all about common development. It's all about building a future of shared future of community for mankind. So I think you know, this is a very different perspective from sort of a very much of a geostrategic centric foreign policy that has been going on for many years in this country. So I think you know, it's a new perspective, and you know, China's achievement and the diplomatic front is certainly winning in last year, and I think we continue to win into the next year.
Sean Ding, when we look at China's foreign policy, of course, its trade policy with many of the countries around the world is firmly embedded in its foreign policy. If we look at the Belt and Road Initiative, which is one of its signature projects around the world, President Xi mentioned it in his speech. Where do you see that going in the year ahead?
Indeed, Arnon, I think you're exactly right. The Belt and Road Initiative was mentioned in this year's speech, and it was actually mentioned in last year's speech and a few years back. It's been in President Xi's mind and in his New Year's plan, so to speak, every year now. And for the year 2020, if you look at the countries that China is working with on the Belt and Road region, you know, they are all developing sort of bilateral relationships and signing deals with China. So I do see a lot of further potentials. Now, what is really important to remember is also China's domestic demand and how to get these countries, instead of benefiting from the Chinese investments and infrastructure projects, loans, but also from selling their products into China. And that's why President Xi mentioned the China International Import Expo held this year, the second one indeed, and how to get these countries to also sort of benefit from the market demand in China. And as one of the panelists mentioned earlier, President Xi said that China is hitting the $10,000 per capita GDP mark. That, of course, on the one hand is an accomplishment, but on the other hand, it also shows a lot of further potential. If you look at the US per capita GDP is $60,000, and here in Canada is about $45,000, depending on what data source you use. So China is still quite far behind on a per capita basis, and there's still a lot of room for the middle class to grow and for consumption, for domestic demand to grow. And how do the Belt and Road countries and all of China's trading partners benefit from that? I think it's something that the Chinese leadership, especially at local levels, will also work on in the new year.
Jonathan, there are also a number of regional issues, strategic issues, political issues that concern China. If we look at the nuclear issue on the Korean Peninsula, for one, relations with Japan, and trade issues, multilateral trade issues in Asia. Do you see anything significant taking place in the year ahead?
I do. You might remember that just a little while ago, China, Russia, and Iran held joint naval exercises near the Persian Gulf. And the point of this was to, again, stress the importance of multilateralism, to address security issues in a very, very strategically and economically strategic part of the world. I mean, China gets a lot of its oil from Iran, and many other countries in East Asia do as well. The United States, all this is happening at a time when the United States is essentially withdrawing from the Middle East. Trump has basically said that if you're a country that gets its oil from the Persian Gulf, then it's up to you, the country, to defend your supply lines. So I think what we see is Russia, China, and Iran banding together to make sure that those supply lines are secure. That's a significant development. China had a naval presence off the coast of East Africa to fight against piracy, but this is an expansion of that, and I think that shows a greater sort of international role for China.
Einar Tangen, one other issue that's been grabbing headlines over the past few months, and that was the street protests in Hong Kong. The president did speak of one country, two systems. He talked about Macau, he talked about Hong Kong as well. Let's listen to what he had to say.
近几个月来，香港局势牵动着大家的心。没有和谐稳定的环境，怎会有安居乐业的家园？真诚希望香港好，香港同胞好。香港繁荣稳定，是香港同胞的心愿，也是祖国人民的期盼。
So, Einar Tangen, what do you read into those sentiments from President Xi?
Well, this is a story of two children, the good child, Macau, and Hong Kong, which is struggling. I mean, she wants to underline that the one country, two systems can work, and that this is, in essence, a temporary setback. He's trying to pull people together. I mean, throughout this whole speech, it's about concrete actions that China has taken and will take. There was not a lot dwelling on any kind of negative or unknowns. But I would caution, one thing I'd like to add to what Jonathan said is China is holding military drills with all of the countries, including Saudi Arabia, India, US. They're not trying to play favorites. The big element this last year, and I think in this coming year, will be how close China and Russia are coming together. Remember that big pipeline being opened up just a few weeks ago, coming into China. I think the energy and also the military cooperation is something that is going to be a feature of international relations, especially between the US and these two other powers.
John, the other thing is that China, as far as its economy is concerned, is going through a pivotal time right now, isn't it? Because it's transitioning from a manufacturing country to one that is consumer and service-based. Where do you see these efforts go in 2020?
Oh, I think this is a trend that's happening on its own. It's very difficult to stop. You know, the manufacturing, historically, it doesn't stay in a country forever. You know, it migrates from Europe to the United States, North America, and from North America to Asia, you know, to Japan, to South Korea, eventually to China. It's not going to stay in China forever. We're starting to see, you know, low-end, labor-intensive manufacturing moving out of China, and some of the segments of the supply chain, you know, the Asia, North America supply chain, is also migrating to some other countries like Vietnam, for example. And I think this is a trend that's very difficult to stop. And you know, the government in China is trying to do something about it. And the only way, in my opinion, is to upgrade in their industrial value chain. And also, you know, to emphasize more on the service side, emphasizing, for example, innovation, the new economy, the digital economy, you know, these sort of new emerging industries. And I think this is the only way out. I think Jonathan speak about one thing he didn't speak about is industrial policy. And I think Chinese government is going to continue to hold on to industrial policy. And this is very important in China. In terms of developing, the government taking a leadership role in developing those emerging sunrise industries, especially in, I would say, semiconductor industry, for example, you know, medical research. These are the things that China grossly lagging behind, and you know, the country wants to catch up. And there will be a lot of investment in these areas. So I think we're going to continue to see the government preparing investment in these areas. I also want to make one correction, if I may. I think in a phase one agreement, the issue about forced technology transfer is part of the deal. In China, tomorrow, there's going to be a new law going into effect. That's called China's Foreign Investor Act. In that law, there's an explicit clause that says that we're not going to do forced technology transfer anymore. So I think this is already part of the deal. It's already being addressed. But I agree with Jonathan that the other issue the state aid issue
Right.
is a very thorny issue.
So that law would afford protection to foreign investors then?
Yeah, I think the practice of forced technology transfer is gone.
Yeah,
I think
okay.
it doesn't have any room in China anymore. I think very much Chinese companies would have to innovate on its own, have to rely on its own in the the bigger context of essentially technology decoupling between the United States and China.
Okay, Jonathan?
I think one other thing that we need to mention is how far China is ahead of the United States in the area of 5G.
Right.
It's already being implemented in China, and I know that if you listen to the advertisements for Verizon and AT&T here in the States, they all talk about 5G as if it already exists, and it doesn't at all.
Yeah, the president did talk about technological advancements in his speech. Sean Ding, the other thing, and of course the president covered a wide range of issues in that speech. It was a very short speech there. One of the other issues he talked about was ecological protection. We know that China is a champion of the Paris Accords. President Xi would like to see those accords being implemented with more vigor. How big a challenge will it be for China in the year ahead? Also, one has to be aware of the fact that China has been facing major challenges as far as pollution is concerned in some of its major cities.
Indeed, Arnon. Environment protection and ecological protection in this so-called sort of new model of development is one of China's 3 tough battles outlined last year. And 2020 indeed is a critical year, as President Xi highlighted in the speech, that it's going to be a milestone year for achieving a lot of these goals. So for the environmental protection, definitely in China, this is going to be a change of paradigm where a lot of local governments will be held a lot more accountable. The local leaders will be held a lot more accountable. Their performance, their promotion, their the incentive system for local governments will be based a lot on environmental protection and ecological protection as well.
Right, very quickly, Jonathan.
Just a point that I'd like to make about the trade agreement, this first phase of the agreement. One of the points that the Chinese have agreed to is to buy, according to the Americans, is to buy more agricultural produce.
Right.
Now, there are 2 problems. The agreement says that this agreement to buy more agricultural produce from the United States depends on not violating WTO rules.
Right.
Now, the Chinese, according to the Americans, have agreed to buy something like $40 or $80 billion worth of products every year. Now, the one problem is that China can't really absorb that much in a year, and in order to buy that much, it would have to take away purchases from Brazil and other countries, and that's against WTO rules.
Okay.
So the text of this agreement is going to be very interesting.
Yeah. Okay, we're going to have to leave it there, though. Thanks to all of you for being with us. That's it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thanks for being with us. Hello, everybody. I'm Anand Naidu. If you enjoy the thoughtful, engaged discussions you see on The Heat, you may also want to subscribe to our podcast. It's appropriately titled The Heat. Twice a week, we take a deep dive on world headlines, talking to experts, journalists, and others. It's a fresh, focused, and intimate look at the issues that matter most. Whether it's the Hong Kong riots, the latest Middle East conflict, or US politics, the Heat podcast gives the clear context needed to understand both what's going on and why. And what's best, we come to you. Whether you're at home or on the go, you can find the Heat podcast just about anywhere podcasts are found. Just search The Heat CGTN. Have a listen today and subscribe. Thanks.